Marcelo, how are you?
That was great.
Thank you. Thank you, Marcelo. You know, what I thought I would do today, especially given the limited time, is to share with the audience a question that has captivated me since the time I was a teenager. And this is basically the question of, you know, are we now, at the beginnings of the 21st century, citizens of one common fatherland or motherland? Or are we still citizens of 193 sovereign nations, members of the United Nations? And is our primary identification still with the country where we were born, the country of the citizenship of our parents? And what I like to do today is I like to present 4 arguments as to why I think that now, in the early part of this century, we are in fact citizens of a single planet Earth. And let me begin, therefore, with my first argument, and I will try to present each in about 3-4 minutes, and then I will end with some general remarks. You know that the United States entered World War II in 1941 after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, and literally within 3 weeks of that event taking place, President Roosevelt invited Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, to come to the White House. And in literally January 1st of 1942, together with some 26 nations, they announced the creation of a new organization called the United Nations. It took 3 years until 1945 for that vision or that plan to come together in the United Nations Charter, which was adopted by 51 nations in San Francisco. And the United Nations Charter begins with the words, "We, the peoples of the United Nations." And then it says, you know, that in order to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which then go on to mention World War I and World War II as having brought huge sorrow to mankind, they decide to go ahead and create this organization. And they say that the UN Charter will be the founding document that will guide and will establish the principles in which these members will operate in coming decades and in the future. They reaffirm faith and fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, in the equal rights of men and women, and of nations large and small. The document says that we are going to practice tolerance and live together in peace with one another as good neighbors, unite in our strength to maintain international peace and security, and employ international machinery for the promotion of the economic and social advancements of the people. What then happened is that over the next several decades, the United Nations membership expanded very rapidly. And by the end of the 20th century, it had 189 members. Today, it has 193 members, and accounting for over 99% of the world's population. And as each member joined the United Nations, they endorsed these principles, which refer to the brotherhood of the human race, which refer to not making distinctions as to race, sex, language, and religion, and so on. So although, of course, many countries have failed or have not fully abided by the principles of the UN Charter, there is no doubt in my mind that the creation of the Charter at the end of World War II represents a kind of a unique moment in human history, when we, the peoples of the world, rose above our differences and made a lasting statement about our common humanity, and resolved to come together to create a better, more peaceful world. So that's my first argument, that the creation of the United Nations itself, with all its limitations and its flaws, itself is an indication that in the 20th century, there was the emergence of a concept of a common global citizenship. Argument number two. Soon after the creation of the United Nations, in 1948 to be precise, the General Assembly of the United Nations adopted a resolution, which is now called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And this document declares that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. We are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. This resolution, which now is the Universal Declaration, was initially endorsed by 48 of the 58 nations which were members at that time. There were no votes against it. And this resolution has turned out to be one of the most significant moments in international law, because it has contributed to a major strengthening of the legal framework underpinning the observance of human rights at the global level. And it has led subsequently, this is a long story and I won't go into the details, it has led to the negotiation of a wide range of international treaties and protocols which address the status of refugees, genocide, the rights of women, slavery, torture, and many other aspects of how we relate to each other among human beings. And the declaration itself has a number of articles. For instance, the will of the people as the basis of government authority. So it's a strong endorsement of democracy. The safety of citizens, the availability of information and freedoms of association and expression, the right to the ownership of property. Interestingly, the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of the individual and his or her family. In other words, they are presenting in the declaration, human dignity and having enough access to resources, like education and public health and nutrition, as a basic right of being born. Of course, again, as the case of the United Nations Charter, countries have not always abided by the principles of the declaration. But again, as in the case of the United Nations, there is no question in my mind that the principles underpinning the declaration are very much a statement about our common humanity, our common human heritage, and the links that binds us across national borders, transcending notions of ethnicity, social class, gender, and religious preference. Third argument, this comes from insights from anthropology. Many people argue and they say, look, the human family is too diverse. We're just too different across cultures and across time zones. And this is an argument against the notions of global citizenship. In fact, a former prime minister of the United Kingdom in 2016 said the following, I quote, "If you are a citizen of the world, you are a citizen of nowhere." In her mind, it is the identification with local values that is the defining mark of citizenship. It is what marks your identity or my identity. I am German, I am French, I am Nigerian, I am Paraguayan. Right? That is basically the limits of our identity, is determined by the nation state. And yet, of course, anthropologists who have been studying this issue for decades will tell you, no, this is absolutely not correct. A very famous American anthropologist, George Murdoch, he was one of the leading anthropologists of his generation. He was the chair of the Department of Anthropology at Yale University for more than 2 decades. And he did once a very interesting exercise. He compiled a list of elements that were common across all known cultures, regardless of location, regardless of time. And this is a very long list, but I'll just mention a few of these things, which he claims are common to all of us, regardless of our particular initial identification, national identification. He said that across all cultures, you can find the following features: athletic sports, bodily adornment, calendar, cooperative labor, courtship, dancing, division of labor, ethics, etiquette, family, feasting, funeral rites, gift giving, hospitality, incest taboos, inheritance rules, joking, language, marriage, modesty concerning natural functions, property rights, sexual restrictions, tool making, trade. I've only mentioned just a few. I could go on and on and on. In his book, there's a long, long one-page paragraph that indicates all of these features which are common to all cultures. And so Murdoch and other anthropologists already in the 1960s were saying that although behaviors across cultures may differ, right? Some people eat rice with chopsticks, others eat rice with forks, right? All cultures are constructed according to this single fundamental plan. The universal cultural pattern is the correction that they use, a concept based on the psychic unity of mankind. And this idea, the psychic unity of mankind, reminds me of something that I was exposed to when I was a young teenager, like some of the people in the audience. When I was 15 years old, I joined the Baha'i community, and the founder of the Baha'i community, Baha'u'llah, he spoke of the earth is but one country and mankind its citizens. And for me, the writings of the anthropologists that I have mentioned confirmed in a very important way this very powerful insight. The earth is but one country and mankind its citizens. And then let me come to my fourth argument. This has to do with insights that come from the latest scientific developments. Many of the members of your audience, being teenagers, were probably not around in the year 2000. But something very important happened in the year 2000, which is basically the completion of the mapping of the human genome. There was a press conference held together by President Clinton and Prime Minister Tony Blair from the United Kingdom, because there had been two teams, one American, one English, working together. I mean, working separately, but communicating with each other. And they decided to declare it a tie, that the mapping of the human genome had been completed more or less simultaneously by these two teams in these two parts of the world. And what are some of the insights that come from that exercise? Well, the head of the American team was a leading scientist by the name of Craig Ventier. And he said, this is fascinating. This is perhaps one of the most powerful insights of the tail end of the 20th century. It is, in my view, on a scale as insights come from the theory of relativity or other powerful developments in 20th century physics. He said that when we completed the mapping of the human genome, one of the first things we wanted to do is to understand the concept of race. Is race something that has scientific underpinning that can be explained in terms of the genes that we have, across racial groups? And he said, we looked at two people from two different racial groups with many different physical features on the basis of which we say they belong to different races. And we ask ourselves, what percent of their genes do you actually need to explain the physical differences on the basis of which we say they belong to different racial groups? And he said, the answer seemed to be in the range of 0.01%. In other words, you need 1/100th of 1% of the genes that we have in order to say, in order to explain the differences, the external differences on the basis of which we say he is a African from Nigeria and he is a citizen from Sweden. And so his conclusion was, there is only one race, the human race. He said that we have a common origin. We have originally migrated out of Africa. And he stated that if we could sequence the genomes of everybody on the planet and compare them, we would find no clear differences on the basis of which we could make meaningful distinctions of race. And so this to me, establishes a very powerful scientific foundation for the concept of one human race. And if we are one human race, then presumably we are citizens of one common homeland, the planet Earth. Um, when I was a young teenager, I came into contact with another assertion made in the Baha'i writings, which basically says God set up no frontier between France and Germany. In other words, the physical boundaries between countries, and we mentioned France and Germany because France and Germany were involved in the two bloodiest conflicts of the 20th century, World War I and World War II, right? And very often the fight was over territory. And what this statement is saying is that these territorial demarcations that separate one country from another country, they are just figments of our imagination. When we got the first photographs of the planet Earth, from space, what did we see? Did we see a line of demarcation between France and Germany? Not at all. We saw an integrated planet without geographical boundaries, and presumably with one human race populating it. Let me conclude by simply saying that these four arguments are very, very important. They matter a great deal. Humanity today faces unparalleled threats to our future, from climate change to nuclear proliferation and the rekindling of the arms race, rising income disparities, persistent poverty, gender inequality. Women continue to be second-class citizens in many, many countries of the world, the majority of the countries of the world. Because none of these threats facing humanity can be addressed effectively without strengthening the bonds of international cooperation, none of them can be solved outside of a framework of people coming together that explicitly incorporates this concept of we the people. We are members of one human family. No one must be left behind on account of nationality, ethnicity, level of education or wealth, gender or religious preference, because we come from the same stock and are now citizens of one common fatherland, our one and only home, the planet Earth. Thank you.
Thank you, Augusto. It's a powerful speech, highly relevant topics that teenagers are not usually exposed to. And one question that I have for you is that what led you in the direction that developed your career? As a teenager, who were your examples, people that you respected and admired, and that eventually made you choose certain options in life that led to where you are today?
There were two kinds of role models I had in my life as I was growing up, especially from my teen years. I guess from the age of 15 onwards. One group included people that had contributed in some important way, to enhance our understanding of who we were, to enhance an understanding of our place in the universe. And here, some of my heroes were the physicist Albert Einstein, the philosopher Bertrand Russell. There was a half a dozen people who I read very, very actively for insight and for understanding. For me, a very important factor in the shaping of my career and my view of the world was provided by sort of the guidance of the Baha'i writings. Early on in my life, I joined the Baha'i community, and in the Baha'i community, there is this concept of one human family, the concept that we must set aside differences, that we must appreciate diversity, which obviously exists, but at the same time see that diversity in the context of notions of unity and one human family. And so these two, one that was perhaps ethical, spiritual, the other one that was practical, scientific, led me to early on have a kind of a passion for mathematics and science on the one hand, and later on, a passion for economics and development economics in particular, because I felt that I wanted to use my skills and my knowledge to contribute in some way to create a better world. And for me, poverty, lack of opportunity, inequality, gender discrimination have been very powerful motivators to try to understand better how, we can redesign our economic system in ways that enhance opportunity and that leave no one behind.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, a follow-up question would be, if you were a teenager today and you had the same role models, right? So Einstein and Russell and the Baha'i spiritual guidance, how do you think your life would be different, right? Of course, we have technology and society is far more advanced in so many ways and stepped back in many others. But how would the same role models impact you as a teenager today?
That's a very interesting question, Marcelo. Something that I think that I have come to think about and understand much better in my middle age, right, than when I was a teenager, and that I wish I had understood it then instead of 40 years later, right, is what I think is a question that has of course been present, throughout our history, and that has agonized and taken a great deal of attention of philosophers and thinkers, which is, what are we here for? What is the purpose of life? Why are you and I and others, including many in the audience, walking around on the surface of this planet? What is the purpose for which we have been created? And obviously, we're running out of time, but I'll answer that question in a very few words. I think the purpose of our existence is to bring blessings to other people. I think that we're here not to accumulate wealth. We're not here to excel ourselves over other people. I think we are here to live a life that brings blessings to other people, our families, those we love, our fellow citizens, people in the world, that we should try to shape our careers, accumulate skills and knowledge, essentially as instruments that will allow us to bring blessings to the lives of other people. That is what defines our existence. That is what we're here for. I understand it now, but it took me some time to come to this realization. And if I hadn't understood it better when I was in my teen years, my life, might have been a little different. But I'm glad that I understand it now, and have understood it already for many, many years. And for me, that is defines the purpose of human existence.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, a life of service is a life worth living, right? And there's a match to the Maslow hierarchy, the categories of needs, where you reach self-actualization. And instead of just being bored and, descending into unhappiness, you realize that, oh, now I no longer have to fight to survive. I no longer have to focus on physiological and security needs. And that's the moment when you can either start struggling with your meaning of life, or when it becomes really clear. And it does take a long time for people to reach this self-actualization stage. And what we're trying to do with the Wisdom Accelerator is exactly to accelerate the path towards that type of wisdom, whatever way it is interpreted. I mean, I've been to Haifa, to the Baha'i temples, and I've been to so many other countries, there's so many other religions and other spiritual guidance traditions. But it took me many years to go around and realize, okay, no, they all have pure intentions that are interpreted according to the local customs and cultures. But there is an essence, this human family that you're describing, everything that connects us at the deepest level. And this is really hard to see because it's buried deep into our souls, right? So the more examples we can give to teenagers, the easier it will be for them to recognize those signs in themselves. And I really appreciate your time here and sharing your wisdom with us today.
Thank you, Marcelo. Thank you for inviting me. It has been a pleasure to be with you and your audience.